All right, let's tackle a question on monopoly here. So as always, I'll explain how I'm parsing information as I read through the question and any decisions that I'm making as I go about solving the question. All right, so let's get going here. Suppose that the campus bookstore is the only place that students can buy their textbooks. All right, that first sentence right there lets me know we're dealing with a monopoly. Okay. The campus bookstore can order as many textbooks as it wants from its distributor at a cost of $10 per book. So that's telling me that my marginal costs are $10 per book. Student demand is T of P is equal to 50 minus 1/2 P. So T of P is the number of textbooks demanded by a single student, right, at the current price of P, and we've got 100 students. So I'm going to have to remember that the demand curve, right, is actually going to be 100 times this. Okay. So if the bookstore sets the price of a book and cannot engage in any sorts of price strategies like price discrimination, what price will the bookstore set? How many books will it sell? And what will total profits be? All right, so this is sort of our standard monopoly problem here. And we know the monopolist is going to try to set their marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. That marginal revenue curve is twice as steep as their demand curve, but we don't actually have that demand curve yet, right? So let's get to work first figuring out how to write down revenue as a function of the number of textbooks, and then we can get our marginal revenue. So my total number of textbooks is going to be 100 times that individual number, right? So times that 50 minus 1/2 P, right? So my total is going to be 5,000 minus 100 times 1/2, so minus 50p. Okay, and I actually want to get the inverse demand function so that I can find the revenue function in terms of t, not in terms of p, right? So I'm going to move my 50p over to the left, my t over to the right, and now I can just divide through by that 50, and it's going to give me, right? What is that going to give me? That's going to give me 100, right, minus 1 over 50 times t. So that, let me be clear that that's not part of it there. That is now my inverse demand function, right? That's what I can use now to write out revenue as a function of t. It's going to be price as a function of t times t. So that's going to be 100 minus 1 over 50t, right? All of that times t. So that's going to be 100t minus 1 over 50 times t squared. Okay. All right, so now we can go ahead and do our marginal revenue as the derivative of revenue with respect to t. So my first term is going to be 100 when I take the derivative. My second term, I'm going to bring down the 2. It's going to give me 1 over 25. Lower the exponent by 1. It's going to give me t. Okay, so we've got marginal revenue. We just now need to set that equal to marginal cost. So I'm setting 100 minus 1 over 25t equal to, going back here, thankfully I wrote down that our marginal costs are 10, right? So we're just going to set that equal to 10. All right, so that's going to give me that 1 over 25t is equal to 90, right? Which is then, when I multiply through by that 25, that's going to give me a t of 2,250. All right. All right, probably would have used a calculator for that. I've got that written down on the side to make life a little bit easier for me. Okay, so we now have, just bringing that number back over, that t is 2,250. Okay, so to get price, we're going to plug that 2250 into our inverse demand function that we found earlier, right? That 100 minus 1 over 50 times t. So our t is that 2250, right? And so if I plug that into my calculator, right, It's going to be 100 minus 45, which is going to give us a price of $55. Okay. All right, so let's start boxing things to keep track of all of our key numbers here. All right, there was my quantity, there was my price. All right, so we figured out how they'll set their price, what quantity they sell. The final thing we had to figure out was their total profits, right? Well, their profits are going to be P times T minus the cost of that T. So our price was 55, our T is 22.50, right? And our costs are just that $10 a book times 22.50, right? And so that is going to work out to 101,250 if my little notes to the side are correct. All right. Okay, part A is done. Let's head back and see what we're supposed to be doing now in part B. Suppose that the bookstore decides to switch to a membership model. Students will pay a one-time fee to join the bookstore and will then be able to buy books at a lower price. All right, so that tells me we're in a two-part tariff type of situation here. Okay, one lump sum and then a price per unit. How much will the bookstore charge for the membership fee? What will they set as the price of a book, and what will profits be? All right, so let's start this one on a new sheet of paper here. Okay, so let's work on part B. Let's start by thinking about the basic graph here of what's going on. We've got some constant marginal costs, right? We have a demand curve that looks like a downward sloping line in this case. And so we have a marginal revenue curve that would look like that. All right, so what we found in part A was we found where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? And so that's why we were up here at $55 and then at that big quantity down there, right? But now that we can charge a membership fee, right, we can capture whatever consumer surplus is left in that membership fee. So I could charge that triangle up there at the price I'm currently charging, or I could lower my price and get a bigger membership fee, right? And so in fact, what I'm going to do is lower my price all the way down to that $10 of marginal costs, right? And so I'm going to just break even on what I'm selling. I'm selling every book at $10, but I can now charge this whole area as my fee, right? So I just need to figure out what that area is. So let's do this for each individual person, right? So if I go back to my original demand function here, right? When P is 10, right? That's going to be 50 minus 5, so that's going to be 45, right? So each individual consumer is going to demand 45 units here, right? 45 textbooks. So the other thing I need to know, though, to figure out this triangle is what this vertical intercept is here, right? Well, that's the price at which demand hits 0, so that's going to be 100, right? 100 divided by 2 gives you 50, so 50 minus 50. So that's 100 up there. Okay. All right, so my fee then is that triangle. So 1/2, the base of that triangle is my 45 minus 0. The height of that triangle is my 100 minus 10. And so if I plug all those numbers in, I'm going to get a fee of $2,025, right? My price that I'm going to charge per book, remember we said that was just going to be pricing at marginal cost, right, at our $10. So we've got my fee, I've got my price, and now I just need my profits, okay? So for profits in this situation, on our sales, every book costs us $10, every book generates $10 from our price, right? So we're breaking even there. We don't have any profits from that. Our profits are going to come from all 100 people each paying that fee, right? So that's just going to be 100 times our 2025, which then just gives us $202,000 and $500, right? So that is our final amount of profits in part B. Notice those are much bigger profits than we had in part A, right? All right, back to the problem here. All right, now suppose the bookstore decides to offer both options. Students can choose to buy the membership and buy books at the price you found in Part B, or they can choose not to buy the membership and buy books at the price we found in A. When offering both options, what will the bookstore's profits be? All right, let's tackle Part C. All right, so the big issue here is that students are going to pick whichever option gives them more consumer surplus. If we go back up to our little graph from before, they were still getting this area in surplus in Part A, right? In Part B, they're not left with any surplus because we charged the fee equal to that. So because of that, students will choose that price of 55 for Part A, right? Because they get positive consumer surplus, so consumer surplus greater than 0, right? While the membership plan leaves them with 0 consumer surplus, right? So CS equal to 0, okay? So profits are going to be what we found in Part A, right? Which were, according to my notes, that 101,250, right? So there we go. That's our monopoly problem.